Okay, so today we're talking about D-Day, and D-Day is probably the most famous battle of World War II by far, and D-Day will take place on June 6, 1944. It was originally scheduled for June 5th, but it was delayed due to some inclement weather, and so they had to put it off by a day. What D-Day is the Allied invasion of Europe, and the code name for it was Operation Overlord. It is the largest land, air, sea invasion in history. It involved 4,000 invasion ships, 600 warships, 10,000 planes, and roughly 175,000 Allied troops. The invasion itself will start just after midnight. It involved 3 divisions of parachuted troops behind enemy lines in order to take strategic targets, in order to prepare the way for the land troops coming in off the beaches as they stormed the beachheads. Now, the Germans were expecting an attack, but they were expecting it at a different position, and so they weren't quite as well armed or well manned as they should have been. And so the invasion, which will land on the Normandy coast, is going to be successful at the same time that it's very, very bloody as well. Now, there are numerous beaches that are going to be codenamed for the operation, and you will have Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, Gold Beach, Juno, and Sword Beach. And on each of these beaches, they have very heavy casualties, and it's 4 days of fighting that will take place before the Allies are able to claim the beaches themselves and are able to land troops and supplies on the mainland. But within a month of taking the Normandy coast, about 1 million Allied soldiers will be in France. And it's at that point that they can begin to open up that second front on Germany and take the pressure off the Soviet Union and begin to push the Germans back. By July 20th, the invasion was so successful, July 20th of 1944, a group of German officers will attempt to assassinate Hitler because defeat seems to be certain and he's not willing to give up or even to consider it. Hitler will escape injury and a bomb will be planted in a suitcase at his headquarters and he just happens to leave before it goes off. The leaders of the revolts will be found and executed, and thousands of possible conspirators will be killed because Hitler was just that pissed that anybody would try to kill him. So he even tracks down the person who sold the suitcase to the soldier and has his family tortured and imprisoned. By August 25th of 1944, Paris will be liberated by the Allies. Now, Paris had been fairly untouched by World War II. In fact, it was almost prosperous at times because the Nazis will use it as sort of a resort. When you're on leave, that's where you went. You went to Paris and you had a good time. And so the businesses in Paris did very well during the war. There will be some women who were suspected of sleeping with German soldiers, and they will have their heads shaved, and they'll be led into the streets as a sign of their shame that they were conspirating or co-conspiring, that they were conspirators. By September, Belgium, Luxembourg, and most of the Netherlands will also be freed from Nazi control. And by November, there's another election in 1944 for the American president, and Roosevelt will be elected to his 4th term. Because basically the American people didn't want to, as the term was, they don't want to change horses midstream. So if you're crossing a river, you really don't want to change the horse that you're riding in the middle of the river. You just want to get across it. So that's kind of the feeling that people had about FDR, was even though he was in really poor health and he looked very tired, they still didn't want to have somebody new come in. They wanted to finish this thing with the guy who started it. December of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge will take place, and this is the last major German counterattack. And the Allied troops are going to be pushed back, which creates a bulge in the line, which is why it gets the nickname of the Battle of the Bulge. And it'll take 2 weeks of fighting before the offensive can be stopped. The Germans are going to capture roughly 120 Americans, and they're going to herd them into a field and mow them down with machine guns and pistols. And 43 of them actually survive this killing. And basically because they fell down when their comrades did, and they had enough blood on them that they looked like they were dead, and the Germans didn't really want to stick around to double check and make sure they were, and so they kind of were able to hide out and then crawl away. And they return back to the American side, and they tell them that this is how the Germans treat their prisoners, and everybody's just astonished by it. Eventually, the Yalta Conference will be held in 1945. It's another meeting between Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. And what they're talking about in this meeting is the final assault on Germany. And they talk about creating a peace organization called the United Nations. And they also set up the groundwork for how they're going to divide up Europe among the Allies, because part of the total victory is that you have to occupy your enemies. Well, who's going to be watching what part, kind of thing. That's what they're going to be discussing. The Allies continue to advance, and by March, all German troops are pushed back within German borders, which is the first time that Germany had been within German borders since 1933. We're talking 12 years that the Germans had been expanding and taking over territory that didn't belong to them. And so by 1945, they're finally pushed back. The Soviet army will eventually reach Berlin by April of 1945, and German soldiers who are found in Berlin are either shot or hanged. Hitler is hiding out in a bunker with his longtime mistress, Eva Braun, and he will marry her in this bunker, and he writes his last address, his last public address, and he blames the Jews for starting the war and his generals for losing it. After he delivers this address, he will then commit suicide. He shoots himself in addition to swallowing poison, and his new bride, Ava, will also swallow poison, as well as some of his top aides as well. His remains, however, were never recovered. The Soviets were the first ones on the scene, so there's a possibility that the Soviets actually took his remains and disposed of them privately and secretly in order to prevent any sort of worship of Hitler, having a shrine to him or anything like that. So that's most likely what happened, that he's buried in some backyard somewhere. The surrender of the Germans will take place on May 7th, 1945. General the unconditional surrender of the Germans on May 7th, and May 8th, 1945 is officially declared VE Day, Victory in Europe Day.